3 years ago, Julian Vandermeer threw his wife out of their penthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, replacing her with a mistress half her age. He told her she was worthless without his money. He told her she would disappear. He was wrong. Tonight, Julian walks into the most exclusive royal gala in Europe, gripping his mistress's waist, ready to flaunt his wealth to the elite. But as the music stops and the spotlight hits the grand staircase, Julian realizes his mistake. The royal hostess, the woman wearing the crown jewels everyone is bowing to, isn't a stranger. It's the wife he destroyed, and she hasn't just moved on. She's come to collect. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday in London, delivered not by a standard courier, but by a man in a livery uniform, driving a matte black Bentley Mulsanne. He bypassed the reception of Vandermeer Holdings entirely, taking the private elevator to the 45th floor and placed the heavy cream card directly onto the mahogany desk of Julian Vandermeer. Julian, a man whose jawline was as sharp as his business practices, picked it up. The paper was textured, heavy, and smelled faintly of lavender and old money. Gold leaf embossed the edges. His Royal Highness, Prince Alistair of Valoria, requests the honor of your presence at the Grand Sapphire Gala, hosted by the Duchess of Solara at the Kensington Palace Orangery. Julian leaned back in his Herman Miller chair, a smirk curling his lips. He tossed the card toward the leather sofa, where Isabella, his current partner, was scrolling through Instagram. "We're in," Julian said, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "The Sapphire Gala. It's the most exclusive event of the season. Only the top 1% of the 1% get invited. CEOs, royals, old money." Isabella looked up, her eyes widening. She was 23, stunningly beautiful, in a way that required high maintenance, with hair dyed a platinum blonde that shimmered under the office lights. "The Sapphire Gala? Julian, that's huge. I heard the ticket price alone is £50,000. "Tickets are for peasants, Isabella," Julian corrected, standing up and buttoning his bespoke Brioni suit jacket. "I didn't buy a ticket. I was invited. It means my merger with the Titan Group has finally put me on the royal radar. This is it. This is the night I solidify my empire." He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the grey London skyline. 3 years. It had been 3 years since he had finalized the divorce from Serafina. He remembered that day with a cold detachment. Serafina, with her mousy brown hair and her practical clothes, crying in the foyer of their old house. She had begged him to work on the marriage. She had pleaded. "I supported you when you had nothing, Julian. We built this together," she had screamed. He had laughed then. "I built this, Serafina. You just existed in the background. You're holding me back. I need someone who fits the part of a billionaire's wife. You're just plain." He had given her a settlement that was insulting compared to his net worth. Thanks to a ruthless prenup, his lawyers had bullied her into signing years prior. She had left with practically nothing. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. Good riddance. "What should I wear?" Isabella asked, snapping him out of his reverie. She was already standing, checking her reflection in the glass. "It has to be something that screams, 'Future Mrs. Vandermeer.'" Julian turned to her, his eyes scanning her figure possessively. "Go to Harrods, the private shopping suite. Tell them to pull the red Alexander McQueen. I want you to look expensive. I want every man in that room to envy me, and every woman to hate you. We are going to walk into that palace and own the room." "And the host?" Isabella asked, looking at the invitation again. "The Duchess of Solara? I've never heard of her. Is she new?" Julian waved a hand dismissively. "Some European aristocrat, no doubt. probably 80 years old and dripping in dusty diamonds. It doesn't matter who she is. What matters is that we are there, and I am going to close the deal with Lord Harrington. Tonight isn't about the host, Isabella. It's about us." He was confident. He was arrogant. He was entirely unaware that the name Solara wasn't a family name. It was a reference to the sun, a symbol of rising from the darkness. Julian checked his Rolex. "Get ready. The car leaves at 7. Tonight we show the world what perfection looks like." The approach to Kensington Palace was a sea of flashing lights. The paparazzi were kept behind velvet ropes, a chaotic ocean of cameras and shouting voices. Black limousines and Rolls-Royces idled in a line, depositing the world's elite onto the red carpet. Inside the back of his Maybach, Julian adjusted his silk bow tie. He looked at Isabella. She was wearing the red McQueen dress, a structured, plunging gown that left very little to the imagination. It was bold, perhaps a bit too bold for a royal gala, but Julian liked the attention. He wanted to be seen. "Ready?" he asked. "Born ready," she purred, applying a final coat of crimson lipstick. The chauffeur opened the door, and the cool London air hit them, followed immediately by the blinding flash of strobes. Julian stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, then turned to offer his hand to Isabella. As she emerged, the cameras went wild. "Julian! Julian, over here! Is it true you're buying the Kensington estate? Isabella, who are you wearing?" Julian guided her down the carpet with a practiced hand on the small of her back. He waved stoically, projecting the image of a man who owned the pavement he walked on. Ahead of them, he spotted Lord Harrington, the man he needed to impress, speaking with a tall, elderly woman in emerald silk. Julian quickened his pace, steering Isabella towards them. "Lord Harrington," Julian boomed, extending a hand. "A pleasure to see you outside the boardroom." Harrington turned, his expression polite but cool. He adjusted his monocle, an affectation, but one he earned. "Ah, Mr. Vandermeer. I see you received an invitation. I must admit, I was surprised." Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Surprised? Vandermeer Holdings is the leading tech conglomerate in the UK. I would think my presence is expected." "Of course," Harrington said, his eyes drifting briefly to Isabella's plunging neckline with a hint of distaste. "It's just that the Duchess is particular about her guest list. She usually favours those with philanthropic endeavours over aggressive acquisitions. I'm sure once I meet the Duchess, I can charm her into seeing the value of aggressive growth." Julian laughed, squeezing Isabella's waist. "Speaking of, where is our host?" Harrington pointed toward the massive oak doors leading into the orangery. "She is inside, preparing for the opening address. It is a masquerade of sorts tonight. Vandermeer. Not of masks, but of revelations. I suggest you tread carefully. The Duchess values authenticity above all else." Julian watched Harrington walk away, annoyed. "Old fool," he muttered to Isabella. "He's just jealous I'm younger and richer." They entered the grand hall. It was breathtaking. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, dripping with crystals. The room was filled with the scent of white roses, thousands of them, arranging in towering pillars. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in white gloves moved silently with trays of vintage champagne. Julian took a glass and downed half of it. He scanned the room. He saw competitors, politicians, and celebrities. He felt a surge of power. He had won. He had divorced the dead weight of his past and ascended to this. "Julian," Isabella whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Look at that necklace." She was pointing to a display case in the center of the room. Inside sat a sapphire necklace that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. "The Star of Solara," Julian read the plaque. "Priceless. rumored to be a gift from the crown prince to his fiancée. I want one, Isabella whined playfully. Play your cards right, and I'll buy the mine that produces them, Julian bragged, loud enough for a nearby couple to hear. As they mingled, a hush began to fall over the room. The lights dimmed, casting a golden glow over the stage at the far end of the hall. The heavy velvet curtains began to sway. "Ladies and gentlemen," a herald's voice boomed, echoing off the marble walls. "Distinguished guests, please welcome your host for the evening, the fiancé of His Royal Highness Prince Alistair and the CEO of the Phoenix Foundation, Her Grace, the Duchess of Solara." Julian swirled his champagne, bored. Finally, let's see this old dowager. The curtains parted. There was no old woman. Standing center stage, bathed in a single spotlight, was a woman of breathtaking elegance. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged a silhouette Julian knew better than his own. It was off the shoulder, revealing skin that glowed like alabaster. Her hair, once mousy and kept in a messy bun, was now a cascade of rich, dark chocolate waves tumbling down her back, shining with health and vitality. Around her neck sat the real star of Solara, diamonds and sapphires that caught the light and threw it back in blinding fractals. She stood tall, radiating a cold, regal power that silenced the room instantly. Julian dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, but he didn't hear it. He couldn't breathe. The room spun. Isabella looked at the mess, then at Julian. "Julian, what are you doing? Who is that?" Julian's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. He felt like he had been punched in the gut by a heavyweight boxer. He stared at the woman on stage, the woman commanding the attention of kings and lords. "It's not possible," he finally whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and disbelief. That's Serafina." The shattering of the glass drew eyes. Heads turned toward Julian. Lord Harrington, the French ambassador, the CEO of rival firms. They looked at the spilled champagne, then at Julian's pale, slack-jawed face. It was a faux pas of the highest order, but Julian was paralyzed. On stage, Serafina didn't flinch. She must have heard the glass break. The acoustics in the orangery were perfect, but she didn't look down. Her eyes, painted with a smoky, alluring makeup that highlighted their amber depth, scanned the crowd with the poise of a queen surveying her subjects. "Welcome," she spoke into the microphone. Her voice. It was her voice, yet it wasn't. Gone was the timid, apologetic tone of the housewife who used to ask him if he wanted tea. This voice was rich, lower in pitch, cultivated and dripping with authority. 3 years ago, I stood in the rain with nothing. Tonight I stand before you to launch the Phoenix Foundation, an initiative dedicated to helping those who have been discarded, to rebuild their lives. Isabella was frantically signaling a waiter to clean up the mess, embarrassed. "Julian, stop staring. Do you know her? Is she an ex-girlfriend or something?" "She's my ex-wife," Julian hissed, the words tasting like bile. Isabella froze. She looked back at the stage, analyzing the woman with critical, jealous eyes. "Her? That's the dowdy wife you told me about? The one who wore sweatpants and baked bread?" She was," Julian stammered. He couldn't reconcile the images. The Serafina he knew wore minimal makeup and bought clothes off the rack. This woman was wearing a gown that likely cost more than his first car, and the way she held herself, her chin lifted, her shoulders back, she looked dangerous. Serafina continued her speech, her gaze sweeping the room. "We often underestimate the strength of what we throw away. We discard people, ideas, and love, thinking they have no value. But pressure creates diamonds. And fire. She paused, a small knowing smile playing on her red lips. Fire creates phoenixes. For a split second, her eyes locked onto Julian's. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't a look of anger. It was worse. It was a look of total, amusing indifference. It was the look a human gives an insect before deciding it isn't even worth stepping on. Then she looked away, continuing her speech to thunderous applause. "I have to talk to her," Julian said, panic rising in his chest. His mind was racing. If she was the host, if she was the fiancée of Prince Alistair, she had power, massive power, and he had treated her like garbage. "Julian, don't," Isabella warned, clutching his arm. "She's the host. You can't just walk up to her." "Get off me," Julian snapped, shaking her off. "She's my wife, ex-wife. I know her. This has to be a joke, a setup." As the speech ended and the music resumed, a waltz, Serafina descended the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. Prince Alistair, a man of 35 with the classic looks of a storybook royal and the sharp eyes of a military commander, met her at the bottom of the stairs. He took her hand, kissed it, and whispered something that made her laugh. A genuine, melodious laugh Julian hadn't heard in 5 years. Julian began to push through the crowd. He needed to re-establish dominance. He needed to prove that he was the one who made her, that she was nothing without him. It was a defense mechanism. His ego couldn't handle the reality that she had surpassed him. He breached the inner circle just as the prince stepped away to speak with a diplomat. Serafina stood alone for a moment, sipping sparkling water. "Serafina," Julian said, his voice loud, trying to sound authoritative, but sounding merely desperate. She turned slowly. Up close, she was even more flawless. Her skin was luminous. She smelled of jasmine and expensive oud wood, a far cry from the vanilla extract she used to smell like. She looked at him, her expression blank. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The insult landed like a slap. "Cut the act," Julian growled, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "It's me, Julian, your husband. What is this? Who are you trying to fool with this costume?" Serafina took a small sip of her water, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Mr. Vandermeer, I presume. I believe the term is ex-husband. And as for the costume..." She gestured to the room, to the palace, to the prince watching them from 10 feet away. "This is my life. It has been for quite some time. Though I suppose you were too busy with your associate to notice." She glanced past him to where Isabella was standing awkwardly in her loud red dress, looking out of place among the understated elegance of the aristocracy. "How?" Julian demanded, his face reddening. "I left you with nothing. I made sure of it. You had no degree, no money, no connections." "You left me with freedom, Julian," Serafina said, her voice dropping to a chill whisper. "And you forgot one thing. I was the one who edited your business proposals. I was the one who managed your network behind the scenes. I was the brain you took for granted. When you threw me out, I didn't cry. I went to work." "You're a fraud," Julian spat, realizing people were watching. "You're playing a role. Does the prince know? Does he know I found you in a library coffee shop in Leeds? Does he know you're damaged goods?" The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Serafina didn't yell. She took one step forward, forcing Julian to step back. She leaned in, her lips close to his ear. "The prince knows everything, Julian. He knows about the affairs. He knows about the hidden offshore accounts you didn't declare during the divorce. He knows about the emotional abuse." She pulled back, her eyes hard as diamonds. "But most importantly," she said, raising her voice slightly, so the surrounding circle, including Lord Harrington, could hear. He knows that I am the one who advised the Titan Group to reconsider their merger with Vandermeer Holdings. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. What did you say? The merger, Serafina smiled, a terrifying, beautiful smile. It's dead, Julian. I killed it this morning. To understand the magnitude of Julian's collapse, one must understand the architecture of Serafina's rise. It was not a fairy tale transformation granted by a fairy godmother. It was a fortress built brick by bloody brick. 3 years ago, the night Julian kicked her out, Serafina Sterling didn't go to a hotel. She couldn't. Julian had cancelled her credit cards while she was packing her bag. She slept in her car, a 3-year-old sedan she had bought with her own savings, parked in a 24-hour Tesco lot on the outskirts of London. She cried until her eyes were swollen shut. But by dawn, the tears had stopped. Serafina realized something crucial in that cold car. Julian was right about one thing. She had made herself small to make him feel big. She had edited his speeches, balanced his books, and charmed his investors, all from the shadows, letting him take the credit because she thought that was what a good wife did. She drove to Heathrow and bought a one-way ticket to Vienna, using the last of her cash. She needed to be somewhere where the name Vandermeer meant nothing. Serafina had a degree in art history, a degree Julian had called useless. In Vienna, she walked into the prestigious Haus der Kunst auction house. She didn't apply for a job. She pointed out that a painting in their window, attributed to a 19th century imitator, was actually an early, unsigned work by Gustav Klimt. She was right. The discovery made the auction house €4 million. They hired her on the spot. For 2 years, she worked 18-hour days. She learned German, French, and Italian. She changed her style, not to attract men, but to armor herself. She traded floral prints for tailored blazers, passivity for assertiveness. She became the iron orchid of the European art world, beautiful, rare, and impossible to crush. She met Alistair one rainy afternoon in a dusty archive in Salzburg. He wasn't wearing a crown or a sash. He was wearing a wet trench coat and arguing with the archivist about the provenance of a medieval manuscript. "You're wrong," Serafina had said, not looking up from her own work. "The vellum is dated 1450, but the ink is clearly a 17th century iron gall mixture. It's a forgery." The man turned. He had piercing blue eyes and a jaw that looked carved from granite. "And who are you to correct a prince?" he asked, though there was a twinkle of amusement in his eye. "I'm the woman who knows more about ink than you," she countered. He didn't fire her. He didn't scold her. He laughed. He asked her for coffee. They talked for 5 hours, not about money or status, but about history, philosophy, and the burden of legacy. He introduced himself simply as Al. It wasn't until their 3rd date, when paparazzi swarmed them leaving a jazz club, that she realized who he was. His Royal Highness, Prince Alistair of Valoria, 3rd in line to the throne of one of Europe's wealthiest distinct principalities. When she tried to break it off, terrified of the spotlight, Alistair refused. "I don't care about your past," he had told her in his chalet in the Swiss Alps, holding her face in his hands. "I care about your mind. You are the only person who treats me like a man, not a title." She told him everything. The divorce, Julian, the humiliation. Alistair hadn't been angry at her. He was furious for her. "He didn't just lose a wife," Alistair had said darkly. "He threw away a queen. One day, Serafina, we will make him see exactly what he lost." And so, the plan for the Sapphire Gala was born. It wasn't just a party. It was a stage play, and Julian Vandemer had unknowingly walked into the final act. Back in the orangery, the air was thick with tension. Julian Vandemer stood frozen, the words, "The merger is dead," ringing in his ears like a funeral toll. "You're lying," Julian whispered, his face draining of colour. "You can't kill the Titan merger. That deal has been in the works for 8 months. Lord Harrington and I—" "Lord Harrington values integrity," Serafina interrupted, her voice cool and carrying effortlessly over the string quartet. "He values stability. When I showed him the forensic accounting of how you funneled company assets into your mistress's lifestyle under the guise of consulting fees, he found you unstable." Isabella, standing next to Julian, suddenly looked very small in her loud red dress. "Julian, what is she talking about? What fees?" Julian spun around to face the room. He needed to find Harrington. He needed to fix this. He saw the Lord standing near a pillar, studiously examining a painting. "Harrington!" Julian shouted, forgetting all protocol. He shoved past a waiter, nearly knocking a tray of caviar to the floor. "Harrington, look at me!" The room went silent. The music stopped. Lord Harrington turned slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was far worse in these circles. "Mr. Vandemer, I believe I made my position clear earlier. The Titan Group does not do business with men who treat their finances and their families with such reckless abandon." "You listened to her?" Julian pointed a shaking finger back at Serafina. "She's a scorned ex-wife. She's vindictive. She's manipulating you. She is the future Princess of Valoria." A deep, baritone voice cut through the air. Prince Alistair stepped forward, placing a protective hand on the small of Serafina's back. He didn't shout, but his voice commanded absolute silence. He looked at Julian with the kind of disdain a lion reserves for a hyena. "And," the prince continued, "she is the most brilliant financial strategist I have ever met. She didn't manipulate anyone, Vandemer. She simply handed over the files you thought were hidden. You really should update your cybersecurity." Julian felt the walls closing in. He looked around the room. People he had known for years, CEOs, bankers, socialites, were averting their gaze. They weren't just looking away, they were physically turning their backs to him. It was the social death, a punishment more severe in high society than a physical beating. He was being erased in real time. "Come on, Julian," Isabella hissed, grabbing his arm. Her nails dug into his suit fabric. "Let's go. Everyone is staring. This is humiliating." "No!" Julian snapped, ripping his arm away. His narcissism wouldn't let him flee. He couldn't leave as the loser. He had to win. He had to show them he was still powerful. "You think you can ruin me?" Julian laughed, manically, adjusting his tie. "I am Vandemer Holdings. I am worth billions. I don't need the Titan merger. I don't need any of you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'll buy my way out of this. I'll buy this whole damn building if I want to." Serafina watched him with a pitying expression. "Check your phone, Julian." "What?" "Check your phone." Julian unlocked his screen. There were 42 missed calls, 30 from his CFO, 10 from his legal team, 2 from the Financial Conduct Authority. He opened his banking app. His face went grey. "Why are my accounts frozen?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Because," Serafina said, stepping down one step so she was eye level with him. "When the Titan deal fell through an hour ago, it triggered a margin call on the loans you took out to leverage the deal. And since the collateral for those loans was your stock, which has plummeted 40% in after-hours trading since the news leaked." "I'm broke," Julian choked out. "Liquidity crisis," Prince Alistair corrected smoothly. "Though, effectively, yes. You are currently trespassing at a charity gala you can no longer afford to attend." The humiliation was total. Julian looked at Isabella, his trophy, his prize. Isabella was looking at her own phone. She looked up at him, her eyes cold. Is it true? Is the money gone? It's a glitch, Julian lied, sweating profusely. I'll fix it. Bella, baby, we're fine. Isabella laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. We? There is no we if there's no money, Julian. I didn't sign up to be a nursemaid to a bankrupt fraud. She turned to Serafina. Your Grace, she said, dropping a clumsy curtsy. I had no idea. He told me you were crazy. He lied to me too. Get out, Julian roared at Isabella. You ungrateful gold-digging. Mr. Vandemer, the prince interrupted, snapping his fingers. Two large men in discreet suits materialized from the shadows. Royal security. You are upsetting the Duchess, Alistair said calmly. And you are upsetting the guests. I think it is time for you to leave. You can't throw me out, Julian screamed. I am Julian Vandemer. You are a trespasser, the prince said. Escort him out. The lady can stay if she wishes to apologize, but he goes. The guards moved in. One took Julian's left arm, the other his right. He struggled, his expensive shoes skidding on the marble floor. Serafina! He screamed as they dragged him backward. Serafina, tell them to stop. I'm your husband. We had a life. Serafina! Serafina didn't look at him. She turned to the conductor of the orchestra and gave a subtle nod. The music swelled, a triumphant, soaring crescendo of Mozart. As Julian was hauled toward the massive oak doors, kicking and screaming like a petulant child, he saw the final image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw Serafina laughing. Not at him. She wasn't even looking at him anymore. She was looking at Prince Alistair, who was whispering something in her ear. She looked radiant, powerful, and free. She looked like a queen. The doors slammed shut, severing him from the light, the warmth, and the life he had thrown away. Outside, it had started to rain again. The paparazzi, sensing blood in the water, turned their cameras away from the celebrities arriving and toward the man being thrown out. Julian Vandemer landed on the wet pavement of the Kensington driveway, his tuxedo muddy, his reputation in tatters. He looked up, expecting his Maybach. It wasn't there. The driver, unpaid for 2 months, had likely driven off the moment the news broke. He was alone. But the story wasn't over. Julian Vandemer was a man who had clawed his way to the top once. He wouldn't accept defeat this easily. As he sat in the mud, humiliated, a dark, desperate rage began to boil in his gut. If he couldn't have his life back, he would make sure Serafina didn't get to keep hers. He reached for his phone to call the one person he knew would help him burn it all down. A tabloid journalist known as the Butcher of Fleet Street. Hello? Julian rasped into the phone, rain dripping down his nose. I have a story. About the future princess. It's a lie, all of it. And I have the pictures to prove it. Marcus Thorne did not have an office. He had a lair. It was a basement suite in Soho that smelled of stale tobacco and printer ink. Known as the Butcher, Thorne had destroyed more careers than the stock market crash. He didn't care about truth. He cared about clicks. Julian sat across from him, shivering in his damp tuxedo. He looked manic. I have photos, Julian said, sliding a manila envelope across the scarred wooden desk. From before, when she was unstable. Thorne opened the envelope with a nicotine-stained finger. Inside were photos of Serafina from 3 years ago. In one, she was crying on the floor of their kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes Julian had thrown. In another, she looked disheveled, wearing baggy clothes, her eyes dark with exhaustion. She looks like a junkie, Thorne grunted, interested. She was, Julian lied, his eyes wide. Depression pills, anxiety meds. She couldn't handle the pressure of being a CEO's wife. I had to carry her. I paid for everything. And now she claims she was the brains? She was a charity case, Thorne. A mental case. If she marries Prince Alistair, she'll destabilize the monarchy. Thorne grinned, revealing yellow teeth. The Mad Duchess. I like it. Front page tomorrow? I want exclusivity, Julian demanded, feeling a surge of his old arrogance returning. And I want payment. £50,000. Done, Thorne said. The next morning, London woke up to a scandal. The tabloids screamed in bold red font, "From bag lady to royalty, the secret mental breakdown of the future princess." Julian sat in a cheap hotel room, scrolling through the comments on his phone. They were vicious. People were calling Serafina a fraud, a gold digger, a liability. He laughed, eating a cold sandwich. He had won. He had tainted her perfection. Prince Alistair couldn't marry a liability, but Julian had forgotten the one rule Serafina had mentioned at the gala. Pressure creates diamonds. At 2:00 p.m., a press conference was called at Kensington Palace. Julian turned on the TV, expecting to see a cancellation of the engagement. Instead, he saw Serafina. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't wearing sunglasses. She stood at a podium, flanked by Prince Alistair on one side and the director of a mental health charity on the other. She looked directly into the camera lens, and Julian felt a chill crawl up his spine. "This morning," Serafina began, her voice steady. "Images were leaked of me from 3 years ago. My ex-husband, Mr. Vandimer, claims these photos show a woman who was mentally unstable." She paused, taking a deep breath. "He is right. I was unstable. I was broken. Because for 5 years, I lived in a home where my self-worth was systematically dismantled. The woman you see in those photos isn't a drug addict. She is a survivor of domestic emotional abuse." The camera flashed blindingly. "I am not ashamed of those photos," Serafina declared, her voice rising with power. "They are my battle scars. They show where I started. And standing here today, as a woman who rebuilt herself from that floor, I am telling every woman watching, you are not defined by the man who broke you. You are defined by how you rebuild." Prince Alistair stepped forward, his face dark with fury. "We have also released the full police report from the night of their separation, along with the medical records indicating Mr. Vandimer's accidental injury to her arm." Julian dropped his sandwich. The medical records. He had bribed the doctor to keep those quiet. How did they find them? "Furthermore," Alistair continued, "the palace is pressing charges against Marcus Thorne for libel, and against Julian Vandimer for blackmail and violation of a non-disclosure agreement. The payment Mr. Vandimer received from the tabloid has been traced. It is a criminal act." The feed cut to a reporter outside Julian's hotel. "Police are currently moving to arrest disgraced CEO Julian Vandimer." Julian heard the sirens before he saw them. He ran to the window. Blue lights flashed against the rain-slicked glass. They weren't coming to interview him. They were coming to take him away. He had tried to bury her, but he didn't realize she was a seed. And now, the dirt he threw was only helping her grow, while he was being buried alive. The downfall of Julian Vandimer did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in the high-definition glare of the public eye. The trial at the Old Bailey, London's central criminal court, was less a legal proceeding and more a public flaying. Julian stood in the dock, encased in bulletproof glass, wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big. He had lost £20 in the 3 weeks since his arrest. The charge list was long: blackmail, extortion, violation of the Computer Misuse Act, and perjury, but the legal charges were nothing compared to the social indictment. The star witness for the prosecution had been the final nail in his coffin: Isabella. She had walked into the courtroom wearing a modest black dress, her platinum hair dyed a sensible brunette, playing the role of the manipulated victim to perfection. She testified that Julian had forced her to pose as his fiancée, that he had coerced her into spending the company money, and that he was obsessed with ruining his ex-wife. It was all lies. Isabella had spent the money with glee, but the jury didn't care. They hated Julian. He was the villain of the year. When the gavel fell, the sentence was 5 years in HMP Wandsworth for financial fraud and blackmail. As the guards handcuffed him, Julian looked back at the gallery, searching for a friendly face. There were none. Lord Harrington was there, shaking his head. His former board members were there, looking relieved he was gone. But Serafina was not there. She hadn't even dignified his trial with her presence. The morning of the royal wedding dawned with a sky the colour of a robin's egg, a rare, perfect blue over London. The city was vibrating. Millions of people lined the streets from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey. Flags waved in a chaotic sea of red, white and blue, interspersed with the gold and emerald banners of the Phoenix Foundation. Inside cell 42 on the G-wing of Wandsworth Prison, the sky was just a sliver of light through a barred window high on the wall. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant, unwashed bodies, and damp concrete. Julian sat on the edge of his bunk. His head was shaved, a precaution against lice, and the sharp, handsome features that had once graced the cover of Forbes were now gaunt and hollow. He wore grey sweat pants and a jumper that itched. "Oi, Vandemer!" a voice shouted from the corridor. It was Biggs, a hulking man serving time for armed robbery, who had taken a twisted liking to tormenting the fallen CEO. "Get your posh ass out here. It's starting. Your missus is on the telly." Julian didn't want to move. He wanted to curl into a ball and sleep until the 5 years were up. But in prison, refusal was not an option. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked slowly into the Common Association room. It was packed. Inmates were crowded around the small, wall-mounted television, jeering and laughing. It was the only channel allowed today. The governor of the prison had deemed it a historic national event. For Julian, it was a televised execution of his soul. On the screen, the camera swept over the mall. The crowds were roaring, a sound like continuous thunder. The commentator's voice, crisp and British, filled the room. "It is a glorious day for the monarchy, and indeed for the country. We are awaiting the arrival of the bride, Miss Serafina Sterling, soon to be Her Royal Highness. The excitement is palpable. It is a fairy tale come true, a woman who rose from hardship to capture the heart of the people's prince." Julian leaned against the back wall, crossing his arms to hide the shaking of his hands. "Look at that car," Biggs whistled, pointing at the screen. A vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom 4, the glasshouse model, was slowly making its way through the cheering throngs. Inside, visible to the world, sat Serafina. Julian felt the breath leave his lungs. She was wearing a gown designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, a breathtaking creation of ivory silk crepe and satin gazelle. The bodice was hand-embroidered with English roses and the mythical phoenix, a subtle nod to her foundation. But it was her face that destroyed him. She wasn't looking down demurely. She was waving, smiling, her eyes bright and alive. She looked victorious. Not in a vindictive way, but in a way that suggested she had completely forgotten the darkness that came before. She looked like she had never been broken. "She's a looker, ain't she, Julian?" a younger inmate sneered, nudging him. "How'd you fumble that bag, mate?" Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was closed tight. He remembered the last time he saw her in a car. It was the day he kicked her out. She was driving her beat-up Ford, crying so hard she could barely see the road. He had watched from the window, sipping scotch, feeling powerful. How? He thought, the word looping in his mind like a curse. How did she do it? Westminster Abbey. The interior of the abbey was a sanctuary of golden light and soaring stone arches. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax. Kings, queens, sultans, and presidents filled the pews. Prince Alistair stood at the altar, dressed in the full ceremonial uniform of the Royal Dragoon Guards, the scarlet tunic stark against the stone. He did not look like a stiff, duty-bound royal. He looked like a man who was struggling to contain an explosion of joy. He kept glancing at the great west door, shifting his weight, his famous composure cracking. As the first notes of Handel's Zadok the priest rang out, the congregation rose. Seraphina began her walk. She walked alone for the first half of the aisle, a break from tradition that she had insisted on. It was a statement, "I come to this marriage on my own 2 feet." Halfway down the aisle, her father did not meet her. He had passed away years ago. Instead, the king himself stepped out from the side. A gasp went through the abbey and through the billions watching at home. The king offered his arm to Seraphina. It was the ultimate seal of approval, the ultimate rejection of anyone who had ever doubted her worth. In the prison common room, the silence was heavy. Even the hardest criminals were watching, captivated by the sheer spectacle of it. "The king," someone whispered. "Blimey, the king is walking her." Julian felt a tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily, terrified anyone would see. He remembered telling Seraphina she was common. He remembered telling her she would never fit in his world. And now, the monarch of England was escorting her to the altar, while Julian rotted in a cage. The camera zoomed in on Seraphina's face as she reached Alistair. The prince didn't wait for the protocol. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tight. He whispered something to her that the microphones didn't catch, but the lip readers would later confirm. He said, "You are the only truth I know." Julian squeezed his eyes shut. He remembered his own wedding to Seraphina. It had been a small registry office affair because he didn't want to spend money on it. He had taken a call from a client during the reception dinner. He had never told her she was beautiful that day. He had told her the dress made her look a bit wide. Regret, cold and sharp as a knife, twisted in his gut. It wasn't just that he had lost the money. It wasn't just that he was in prison. It was the sudden, horrifying realization that he had held a diamond in his hand and thrown it into the mud because he was too blind to see it shine. He had spent his life chasing more money, younger women, higher status. And in front of him, on a grainy 24-inch screen, was the embodiment of everything he had actually needed: loyalty, intelligence, and grace. The vows. The Archbishop of Canterbury, his voice resonating through the vast history of the abbey, began the vows. "Alistair Edward James, will you take Seraphina Marie?" "I will," Alistair said, his voice booming without hesitation. "And will you, Seraphina Marie, take Alistair?" The camera held on Seraphina. For a split second, her eyes seemed to drift upward, looking at the stained glass, looking at the light. "I will," she said. Her voice was different than the one Julian knew. It was lower, anchored in certainty. "Who gives this woman?" the Archbishop asked. "She gives herself, with the blessing of the crown," the king replied. Julian felt like he couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The contrast was too much. The beauty on the screen versus the squalor of his reality. The love in their eyes versus the hatred directed at him from the world. He stood up abruptly. "Sit down, Vandemer," Biggs barked. "They're doing the rings." "I can't," Julian rasped. I'm sick." He pushed past the inmates, ignoring their jeers and curses. He stumbled out into the corridor, leaning against the cold brick wall, gasping for air. He slid down until he hit the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. From the room, he could still hear the television. "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." A roar went up, both from the Abbey on the TV and from the prisoners inside the room. It was a sound of universal celebration. Julian put his hands over his ears. He pressed hard, trying to block it out. But he couldn't block out the memory. He remembered the night he came home late, smelling of Isabella's perfume. Serafina had been waiting up with dinner. She had looked at him, knowing, and asked, "Why, Julian? Am I not enough?" And he had looked her in the eye and said, "You're nothing, Serafina. You're just background noise." Now, she was the melody the whole world was singing, and he was the silence. The balcony. An hour later, the scene shifted to Buckingham Palace. The mall was a solid wall of people. The royal family stepped out onto the balcony. The noise was deafening. Fighter jets roared overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke. Serafina stood next to Alistair. She waved the sapphire engagement ring, the ring that had started the nightmare for Julian, glinting in the sun. She looked out over the sea of faces. She saw the signs. "We love Serafina, the Phoenix Princess." In that moment, Serafina did think of the past. But she didn't think of Julian. She didn't think of the insults or the lonely nights. She thought of the girl sleeping in the car in the Tesco parking lot. She thought of the cold fear in her stomach that night. She mentally reached back to that girl, grabbed her hand, and pulled her onto the balcony. "We made it," she thought. "We survived." She turned to Alistair. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. "For what?" He smiled. "For the work," she said, her eyes serious. "The foundation, the policies. We have a lot to do." Alistair kissed her hand. "With you, I'm ready for anything." The end of the line. Back in Wandsworth, the television was finally turned off. The inmates dispersed for the afternoon count. Julian sat in his cell. The silence was absolute. He looked at the small metal table bolted to the floor. On it sat a single letter. It had arrived yesterday, but he hadn't opened it. The return address was embossed with a silver crest, the Phoenix Foundation. His hands trembling, he tore it open. There was no money inside, no gloating, no pictures of the wedding. It was a single sheet of cream paper, the same high quality as the invitation that had started this mess. It read, "Julian, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, and not because you asked for it, but because my future is too bright to carry the weight of hating you. You told me once that I was nothing without your money. I hope, in the silence of your cell, you finally understand. Money is just paper. Character is currency, and you are bankrupt. Do not write to me. Do not look for me. I am gone. Serafina." Julian stared at the letter. "I forgive you." It was the ultimate power move. If she had been angry, it would have meant he still mattered. If she had hated him, it would have meant he still had a hold on her. But forgiveness? Indifference? That was erasure. She had scraped him off her shoe and kept walking. He crushed the letter in his fist. A sob broke from his chest, a jagged, ugly sound. He wasn't crying for her. He was crying because he knew, with terrifying clarity, that the rest of his life would be nothing but a footnote in her biography. He lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. The sun had moved, and the sliver of light in his cell was gone. It was dark now, and in the darkness, Julian Vandemer finally disappeared. Character is currency, and you are bankrupt. That might be the most brutal line Serafina ever delivered, and she didn't even have to say it to his face. The story of Julian and Serafina proves that the best revenge isn't anger, it's absolute, undeniable success. Serafina didn't just survive, she evolved. She turned her pain into a crown and wore it for the world to see. I want to know what you guys think about that ending. Did Julian deserve the letter, or should Serafina have just ignored him completely? Was 5 years in prison enough for what he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your theories and reactions. If this story gave you chills, please smash that like button and share it with a friend who needs a reminder of their own worth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I have an even crazier story coming next week, involving a billionaire, a secret heir, and a betraying best friend that you do not want to miss. Thank you for watching, and remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. See you in the next one. Before you start, hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single corporate revenge story like this one. What happens when the ultimate betrayal occurs before the eyes of the entire world? He was Dominic Stone, a real estate magnate from Manhattan, notorious for his boundless ambition. She was his silent, beautiful wife, Eliza. But at the Apex Foundation Charity Gala, Charleston's most important social event, Dominic didn't just ignore his wife. He dared to publicly and passionately kiss his new mistress, Sierra Vance, in front of every single photographer. The humiliation was total. The world saw Eliza's life shatter, but everyone forgot one crucial detail, a secret Eliza had kept for 12 years. Dominic may have run the company, but Eliza owned it, and the hammer was about to fall. The Gilded Cage. The grand ballroom of the Wentworth Mansion in Charleston was stifling. It wasn't the heat. The air conditioning maintained an Arctic chill that carried the scent of 1,000 jasmine blossoms. It was the weight of the diamond necklace, a generous anniversary gift from Dominic, which felt more like a beautiful, glittering leash. The weight of the bespoke midnight blue silk gown, a color Dominic had deemed subtle and appropriate. And, most of all, the weight of being Mrs. Eliza Stone. To the world, Eliza Stone was the luckiest woman in America. 12 years ago, she was a quiet, bookish young woman. A nobody. Then she captured the attention of Dominic Stone, the most ambitious, charismatic, and ruthless property developer in the Southeast. He had built Stone Capital from nothing, a story he told often, turning it into a $10 billion empire. Eliza, with her understated elegance and slender figure, was the perfect accessory. She chaired the right charities, spoke only when spoken to, and looked exquisite on his arm. Tonight was the Apex Foundation's annual gala. In theory, it was Eliza's event, the chairwoman's. But when Dominic strode onto the stage, the lights followed him like a magnet. "We all have a duty," Dominic thundered, his voice like polished steel filling the room. He flashed his famous predatory smile. "A duty to build, a duty to succeed, and when you succeed, a duty to give back." The room, filled with Charleston's Southern nobility and Atlanta's new tech elite, erupted in applause. Eliza clapped softly, her smile as rehearsed and perfect as the pearls on the woman next to her. She watched her husband. He was a magnificent creature, all sharp angles, costly tailoring, and blinding confidence. He looked in every way the king of the city. But kings become careless. Eliza felt the shift 6 months ago. It wasn't a sudden storm, but a change in the air, a drop in barometric pressure. It was the way Dominic suddenly began guarding his phone, tilting the screen away from her, though she had never shown the slightest interest. It was the new, unmistakable scent on his cashmere sweaters. Not his cologne, but something musky, expensive, and invasive. It was the whispers. "He's a titan," a voice drifted from a nearby table. "But that new VP of his, Sierra Vance, she's the one with the killer instinct. They say she's the reason the Suncoast deal closed. They say a lot of things about her," the columnist purred, his eyes finding Dominic on stage. "She's brilliant and devastating." Eliza's hand, resting on the white linen tablecloth, tightened. Sierra Vance. The name had been a constant in their home for months. Sierra closed the deal. Sierra reorganized the division. Sierra works as hard as I do. Eliza had done her own quiet research. Sierra was indeed devastating. A tall, fiery redhead, a Wharton graduate with a social media presence as sharp and curated as her cheekbones. Her feed was a mix of brutalist architecture, high fashion, and enough candid boardroom shots at Stone Capital to signal her importance. Dominic finished his speech, and the applause was deafening. He strode off stage, but instead of returning to Eliza's table, he was intercepted by a mob of adoring fans. Eliza watched him laugh, that great theatrical laugh, and slap a rival developer on the back. Her cell phone vibrated silently in her clutch bag. A single-line text message from a number saved as AG. Account settled. Event Horizon provision confirmed and secured. Eliza read the message once. A barely perceptible breath escaped her. She texted back a single word. Admitted. She looked up. Across the ballroom, Dominic had finally worked his way to Sierra Vance. Sierra, in a daring, crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination, looked at him not as an employee, but as a predator assessing her prey. She laughed, touching his forearm. It was a casual gesture of intimacy that screamed ownership. Eliza picked up her water glass, the cool crystal against her skin. The weight of her dress, the diamonds, the last name. It was all still there. But it was no longer a cage. It was armor. She was the quiet wife, the subtle accessory, the woman who would never, ever be a threat. And as she watched her husband and his mistress in the center of the room, Eliza Stone realized with chilling calm that everyone had made a terrible, terrible mistake. They believed she was just the wife of the man who ran the company. They had no idea she was the woman who owned it. Preparation for revenge. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in subtle psychological warfare. The event Dominic and Sierra were organizing was not a hidden affair. It was Stone Capital's 12th anniversary Grand Innovation Gala. It was, by all accounts, Dominic's masterpiece. He was planning to unveil his legacy project, a multi-billion-dollar smart city complex that would redefine the Charleston skyline. His name was on the invitations. His face was on the cover of Forbes that month, anticipating the announcement. Eliza's preparations were quieter. "Mr. Graham," she said, her voice soft in the soundproof study of her own townhome in the French Quarter, a property Dominic didn't even know she owned. This was not the shared penthouse, but her sanctuary, her real office. Arthur Graham, AG, was a man who looked carved from granite. He had been her father's chief counsel, and now he was hers. He was the only person alive who knew the entire truth. "Eliza," he replied, his voice a gravelly monotone. He never called her Mrs. Stone. "The Ether Holdings board is concerned." "Ether Holdings is me, Arthur," Eliza said, turning from the window. "And I am concerned. But not about the stock price. I am concerned about the rot. The rot? Mr. Stone is about to announce the legacy project, Arthur said, adjusting his spectacles. A project funded entirely by Ether through 3 shell corporations and presented as his own. If he sinks, we take the hit. He is going to sink, Eliza said. He's arrogant, he's careless, and he's in love, or whatever he calls it, with a woman who is as arrogant and careless as he has become. He thinks he is the sun, and he's about to fly right into it. So what do we do? Arthur asked. We do nothing, Eliza said. We let him. We let him fly. We let him reach the highest point. And when he's at the apex, I will hand him the bill for the wax. She turned back to the window. I need you ready, Arthur. Event Horizon Protocol. I want it loaded. I want the termination for cause documents drafted. I want the asset seizure orders filed and sealed, ready to execute on my command. That is scorched earth, Eliza, Arthur said, the closest he ever got to surprise. That is what is left after a forest fire, Arthur, she countered. And I am standing in the ashes. Pause for thought. If you were Eliza, would you have exposed Dominic immediately, or waited for the perfect moment like this? Comment your answer. In the penthouse, the glass and chrome box Dominic called home, the tension was palpable. The Innovation Gala is everything, Eliza, Dominic said, pacing in front of his walk-in closet, which was the size of a studio apartment. He was already in his tuxedo shirt. This isn't one of your charity things. This is legacy. I am aware, Dominic. You've mentioned it. Eliza was at her vanity, applying a neutral and unassuming lipstick. I need you immaculate tonight, he said, not looking at her. Simple, elegant. The Atlanta board is flying in. The mayor will be there. I don't want distractions. Distractions? She repeated. Her voice flat. Yes, just be the perfect hostess. Smile, shake hands, and leave the important conversations to me. He finally turned, his eyes sweeping over her. And where is the blue? The one I like. The blue? She said. Yes, not that garish red thing you bought last week. Eliza's gaze was immutable. I didn't buy a red dress, Dominic. He frowned, annoyed. Whatever. Just be ready. The car is here in 20. He walked out of the room, already on the phone. Sierra, make sure the press kits have the new design. Eliza stared at her reflection. She hadn't bought a red dress, but she knew with the certainty of the sunrise who had. She picked up her phone and sent a new text to Arthur Graham. Add Sierra Vance to termination protocol. Cause, conspiracy to defraud principal shareholder. Admitted. Eliza stood up. She looked at the midnight blue dress Dominic had laid out for her. Then she walked to the back of her closet, to a garment bag she had retrieved that afternoon. Dominic wanted simple. He wanted subtle. He wanted his wife to be a shadow. She unzipped the bag. Inside was a dress the color of ice, a dazzling, shimmering, bespoke Oscar de la Renta that didn't just enter a room. It conquered it. He wants a distraction, she whispered to her reflection. He is about to get one. The kiss. The Gibby's Museum of Art in Charleston was transformed. The Grand Hall, usually reserved for ancient relics, was now a monument to modern ego. Giant screens with stone capital projections swept the walls. The air thrummed with a string quartet playing a modern rendition of an Albanese concerto. When Dominic and Eliza Stone arrived, a blast of paparazzi exploded in a blinding wall of light. Dominic, as always, soaked it up. He put his arm around Eliza's waist, a possessive gesture. But the narrative shifted. The whispers from the press line were different tonight. It's Eliza. Mrs. Stone, look at that dress. Eliza, in her shimmering, glacial white gown, looked less like a shadow and more like a queen. The diamonds at her throat were not a leash. They were a warning. She smiled, a tiny, knowing Samaro smirk, and let Dominic lead her inside. But she was the one everyone watched. Dominic felt it. He gripped her waist harder, his smile tightening. "It's a lot of dress, Eliza. Too much, don't you think?" "Is it?" she murmured, slipping from his grasp to take a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "I thought it appropriate for an anniversary." She glided into the crowd, a vision in white, leaving him standing in the entryway, scowling. The party was a sea of Dominic's success. The mayor was there, the Atlanta investors reserved and watchful. And then there was Sierra Vance. She had indeed worn red. It was a column of blood-colored silk, dazzlingly bold, that was practically painted on. Her fiery hair was pulled back, her lips painted the same shocking red. It was a declaration of war, and she stood by the model of Dominic's legacy project, acting as if she were the hostess. Eliza watched from a distance. She saw the glances, the whispers, the way Dominic and Sierra kept finding each other, their bodies aligned, their heads bent. They were a power couple who radiated Ennead energy, and Eliza was once again relegated to the role of wife. The moment for the main event arrived. Dominic strode onto the stage. "Tonight," he began, his voice choked with emotion, "we don't just celebrate 12 years of success. We celebrate the future, a future I built." Eliza, standing near the back, felt a chill course through her veins. "A future I built. I couldn't have done it alone," Dominic continued. He thanked the mayor. He thanked the board. And then he smiled, his gaze fixed on the red dress in the front row. But the vision is nothing without a catalyst, without someone who shares that fire, someone who sees the world the way you do. Please join me in thanking the brilliant, the visionary, Sierra Vance. The spotlight swung to Sierra. She looked triumphant. She walked toward the stage. And then, the unthinkable happened. It was not a handshake. It was not an embrace. Dominic, high on his own ego and the roar of the crowd, leaned in. Sierra, eyes locked on his, met him on the steps. In front of 200 guests, the mayor of Charleston, the international press, and his wife, Dominic Stone, pulled Sierra Vance into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was a deep, passionate, cinematic-level kiss. The flashes didn't just pop. They exploded. The room went into utter silence. The only sound, the click, click, click of a dozen cameras capturing the moment. Eliza did not move. She did not gasp. She did not faint. She simply stood, her face a pale, beautiful mask, and watched. She saw the man she had once loved, the man she had created, publicly and brutally humiliate her. She saw Sierra's hand curl around Dominic's neck, a gesture of pure, triumphant ownership. A single reporter, braver than the rest, swung his camera from the stage to Eliza. The flash was blinding. It captured the image that would be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal the next day. The perfect wife, ice cold, watching her own life detonate. The kiss ended. Dominic, dazed, looked out at the silent crowd. Sierra, lipstick barely smudged, looked directly and intentionally at Eliza. It was a smirk of pure victory. Eliza held her gaze. Then, with a calmness more terrifying than any scream, Eliza Stone placed her champagne flute on a waiter's tray, turned, and walked out of the grand hall. She did not run. She walked. Every step was measured, her back straight. The perfect wife had left the building. The execution. Dominic did not come home. The digital clock on Eliza's bedside table read 4:17 a.m. The silence of the penthouse was absolute. The dress of ice was pooled on her dressing room floor, a shimmering snakeskin she had shed. Eliza was in a simple gray silk robe, sitting in the darkness, watching the city that never slept. her city. Her cell phone, which had been incessantly vibrating for hours, with texts from concerned friends and calls from Dominic that she had silenced, lit up with a single message from Arthur Graham. "Are you all right?" It was the most personal thing he had ever asked her. He kissed her in front of everyone. "The journal is already online." "The stone and the siren," Eliza typed. A moment later, Arthur replied, "The protocol, activate." Eliza's thumb hovered over the screen. This was the final button. There was no going back. She thought of the 12 years of work, of building Dominic, of believing in the man he could be. She thought of the look on Sierra's face, that smug reptilian victory. She thought of the kiss, the arrogance, the public execution. "Activate," she wrote. "Event horizon full. Seize assets, freeze accounts, terminate leases. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning with nothing but his arrogance." "It will be done," Arthur replied. "Ether board meets at 9:00 a.m. to ratify the vote. Security has been dispatched to Stone Capital HQ. They secure the servers at 6 a.m. "And Arthur?" Eliza typed. "Yes. Make sure they change the locks on the executive washroom." Eliza switched off the phone. She felt nothing. No sadness, not even rage, just a deep, cold emptiness that was rapidly filling with resolve. The sun was rising over the Cooper River when the penthouse door finally opened. Dominic stumbled in, his tuxedo tie undone, his hair mussed. He reeked of Sierra's perfume. He saw Eliza sitting in the morning gloom, and he visibly flinched. The bravado of the night before was gone, replaced by pale, hungover fear. "Eliza," he started, his voice thick. "Look, about last night." "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. It happened so fast. The energy, the crowd, Sierra. "Her name," Eliza said, standing up, "is the last thing I ever want to hear you say." "Eliza, listen to me." He tried to grasp her arm, his old authoritarian tactic. She stepped back, and his hand fell in the air. "You have to understand this. This is passion. This is real. What you and I have, it's comfortable. It's a partnership. But this, a partnership?" she repeated, nodding super slowly. "Yes, that's what we were." A wave of relief washed over his face. He mistook her calm for weakness, for acceptance. "Exactly. And I will take care of you. I'm not a monster. You'll have the penthouse, the Marbella villa, a very, very generous allowance. You'll never have to work a day in your life." He was already dividing the assets, assuming they were his to divide. "You're giving me the penthouse?" she asked, tilting her head. "Of course, and the driver. Just don't fight this, Eliza. Don't make it ugly. My lawyers will draw up the papers. We can call it irreconcilable differences. It'll be clean." "My lawyer," Eliza said, walking toward her dressing room, "is Arthur Graham." Dominic laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. "Graham? Your father's dusty old probate attorney. Eliza, don't be naive. He's a fossil. He's no match for my team. He'll be eaten alive. Just take the deal." Eliza paused at the door. She looked back at the King of Charleston standing in his living room, his shirt stained with another woman's lipstick. "You're right, Dominic," she said softly. "He is no match for your lawyers. He's so far above them, they aren't even playing the same game." She closed the door. He heard the click of the lock. Dominic, annoyed but relieved, poured himself a whiskey. He thought the worst was over. He thought he had won. He called his head of security. "Yes, Marcus. I'm working from home today. Lock down the executive floor. I don't want anyone bothering me, except for Ms. Vance, of course. Let her up." There was a pause. Mr. Stone?" "What?" Dominic snapped. My keycard isn't working." "What do you mean it's not working? It's a gold level pass." "No, sir, I mean, the building isn't working." There are men here in suits. They're not our guys. They're Ether Holdings security. They're changing the locks, sir." Dominic's blood ran cold. "Ether, the holding company, why are they—" "Put the man in charge on the phone right now." The contract. To understand the beauty of what was happening at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, you must understand the lie Dominic Stone had been living for 12 years. Eliza's father, Lord Sterling Blackwood, had not been a probate attorney. He had been a ghost, a quiet, discreet tech and real estate genius who founded Ether Holdings in the 1980s. He bought land, patents, and entire city blocks, then hid them behind layers of LLCs and trusts. He hated the spotlight. When he died, he left his only daughter, Eliza, not just a fortune, but an empire. Eliza, then 25, had a choice. She could have become the billionaire on the covers, but she was her father's daughter. She wanted a low profile, and she wanted a partner, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by her. She met Dominic Stone when he was a junior analyst with lots of charm and a failing startup. He had no idea who she was. He only saw a beautiful, quiet woman. She saw his pure ambition and hunger. She decided to run an experiment. She gave him a seed loan. Family money, she called it. She let him found Stone Capital. What he never knew was that the company was founded as a 100% majority-owned subsidiary of Ether Holdings. He was never the owner. He was never the founder. He was, and always had been, the chief executive officer, CEO, an employee. Every brilliant deal he closed was with Ether's money. Every building he acquired was Ether property leased back to Stone Capital at a friendly rate. His entire empire, his name on the building, his private jet, his legacy project. It was all built on a foundation owned by the woman he had just told to keep the penthouse and the prenup. Dominic had insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect his future wealth. Eliza's lawyers, led by Arthur Graham, Ether's chief counsel, were delighted to draft it. It was an ironclad document that stated, without ambiguity, that upon divorce, all assets acquired before and during the marriage would be divided based on verified original ownership. Dominic had signed it with a smirk, thinking he was protecting himself from a gold digger. He had just signed his own death warrant. The Event Horizon Protocol was a tiny clause buried deep in Dominic's 200-page employment contract, a contract he had been too arrogant to read. It stipulated that if the CEO, Dominic, committed any act of gross public misconduct or moral turpitude that threatened the reputation of the parent company, Ether, the board could terminate his contract for cause with immediate effect. Termination for cause meant he lost everything: salary, bonuses, severance, and, most importantly, his unvested stock options. The public, passionate kiss with an employee at a company-sponsored event, which was now on the front page of every Western newspaper. That, Arthur Graham would argue, was the very definition of gross public misconduct. The 9 a.m. board meeting was not a meeting. It was a formality. It consisted of Eliza, as the sole shareholder, signing a single document presented by Arthur Graham. "I, Eliza Sterling Stone, chairwoman, and sole owner of Ether Holdings, hereby ratify the termination of Dominic Stone, CEO of subsidiary Stone Capital, for cause, effective immediately." The empire fell with the scratch of a pen. The confrontation. Julian was in full-blown panic. His phone was a brick. His email had bounced back with a user unknown error. The private elevator to his office, access denied. He had, in fact, taken a cab, to the Stone Capital Tower, the glass and steel monument to his own ego. He stormed the lobby, face crimson. "I am Dominic Stone, You will let me up to my office!" He roared at the new security guards in the lobby. They were big, quiet men, with the Ether Holdings emblem on their lapels. "Mr. Stone, sir, your name is not on the access list," the lead guard said, his voice polite, but final. "I am the access list," Dominic shouted. "No, sir, you are not." Just then, the elevator doors chimed. Sierra Vance arrived, looking flustered, but triumphant. She wore a sharp white pantsuit, ready for her first day as the unofficial new Mrs. Stone. "Dominic, darling, what is going on? My driver's corporate card was rejected," she said, annoyance in her voice. Then she saw the guards. "What is this? These goons won't let me up to my own office," Dominic said, grabbing her arm. "Don't be ridiculous," Sierra scoffed. She marched up to the lead guard. "I am Sierra Vance, Executive Vice President. These guards are fired. Call your supervisor now." The guard looked at a tablet in his hand. "Ah, yes, Ms. Vance. We have a package for you." He handed her a simple manila envelope. Sierra opened it, a smug look on her face. Her expression changed as she read. Her face went from smug to confused, then to ashen white. Inside was a single-page letter. It informed her that her employment at Stone Capital had been terminated, effective immediately, for company code of conduct violations and conspiracy to defraud. It further informed her that the company-leased apartment she lived in would need to be vacated in 24 hours. Attached was an invoice for misappropriated corporate assets, including designer clothing, flights, and the red dress she had worn last night, all charged to the corporate Amex. This is a joke," she whispered, the paper trembling in her hand. "Dominic, what is this? What is Ether?" Dominic was saying, his voice ragged. "They're just our silent partners. They're a holding company. They can't do this." "Indeed," a voice said. "They can." Arthur Graham walked through the lobby doors, flanked by 2 more Ether guards. He looked like a very distinguished and very expensive undertaker. "Mr. Stone, Ms. Vance," Arthur said, his voice flat. "You are trespassing on private property." "Private property?" Dominic shrieked. "This is my building. I built it." "No, Mr. Stone," Arthur corrected him. "You were employed in this building, a building owned by Ether Holdings. As of 9:01 a.m. this morning, your employment and Ms. Vance's employment were terminated for cause." The word "for cause" hit Dominic like a physical blow. You can't! The board will never approve this. I am the board." "You were the chairman of the subsidiary board, Mr. Stone," Arthur said, glancing at his watch. "A board which was dissolved by its sole shareholder this morning. Security will now escort both of you off the premises. Any attempt to re-enter will be unfortunate." The guard stepped forward. "No." Sierra suddenly found her voice. It was ragged and ugly. "You can't. Dominic is the most powerful man in this city. He will sue you. He will sue Aether. We will own that company." Dominic for the first time looked utterly defeated. He knew deep down the power of Ether. He just never knew who they were. "Who?" he whispered, looking at Arthur. "Who? Who is Ether? Who did this?" Arthur Graham looked past Dominic to the main entrance. The glass doors swung open. "I did." Eliza Stone walked into the lobby. The transformation was absolute. Last night's dress of ice was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp black Tom Ford pantsuit. Her hair was pulled into a severe, powerful knot. Her face was pale, composed, and absolutely terrifying in its calmness. She was not Mrs. Stone. She was Eliza Sterling. She was flanked by her own security detail. Dominic's jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face. He looked from Eliza to Arthur Graham, and back to Eliza. The math, as simple as it was devastating, was finally adding up in his head. "Eliza," he said, his voice a pathetic croak. Sierra, however, was still in fight mode. "Oh, look," she scoffed, her voice dripping contempt. The scorned wife came to cry. "Did you come to beg for your allowance, darling? I'm afraid Dominic and I are liquidating." Eliza didn't even look at her. Her eyes were locked on Dominic. "You!" Dominic whispered, pointing a trembling finger. It was you. Your father. Probate." "My father," Eliza said, her voice clear and cold, ringing in the marble lobby, "was Lord Sterling Blackwood, founder and sole owner of Ether Holdings. And as his sole heir, I am Ether Holdings." The confession hung in the air, a live grenade with the pin pulled. Sierra's face crumpled. No, that's not possible." "I own this building," Eliza continued, stepping forward. Dominic stepped back. "I own the land it is built on. I own the chair in your office, the jet you flew last week, and the watch on your wrist. All of it. Ether property leased back to a CEO who was too arrogant to read his own contract." Dominic was hyperventilating. The prenup? The prenup!" Eliza almost smiled. "Oh, I am so glad you brought that up. Arthur, did you bring the prenup?" Arthur Graham stepped forward and held up the document. "It's quite clear, Mr. Stone. All assets revert to their verified original ownership. Since all of your assets were, in fact, my client's assets, you are left with exactly what you had when you met her." Dominic's mind flashed back 12 years, a failing startup, a $2,000 suit. "You get nothing," Eliza said. It was not a threat. It was a fact. "You are not entitled to the penthouse because I purchased it with Ether funds. You are not entitled to the Marbella house, or the cars, or the art. You are not entitled, per the moral turpitude clause you violated last night, to even a severance package." She finally swung her gaze to Sierra. Sierra, who had been frozen in horror, visibly recoiled. "And you, Ms. Vance," Eliza said, her voice dropping to an arctic whisper. "You thought you were sleeping with the king. You were sleeping with a middle manager. A very, very well-paid middle manager, but an employee nonetheless." I will sue you," Sierra shrieked. "Wrongful termination, harassment." "Please do," Arthur Graham interjected, handing her a second envelope. "This is a copy of the SEC criminal complaint we are filing, detailing your conspiracy to use Mr. Stone's revoked authority to defraud the parent company. I believe the term is wire fraud. And this," he handed her a tablet, "is the security recording from Dominic's office, where you authorize the use of corporate funds for your Legacy Project media campaign. A campaign that was, in fact, a PR blitz for your personal relationship. I believe my fossil legal team will very much enjoy discovery." Sierra stared at the evidence, then at Eliza. She saw no mercy. She saw no anger. She saw nothing. Only the cold, black void of a problem being solved. Sierra dropped the tablet. She turned and bolted, her heels echoing on the marble, out of the building and out of their lives. Now it was just Dominic and Eliza. "Eliza," he pleaded, his voice breaking. He held out his hands. "Darling, please, I didn't know. It was a mistake, a test. It was a stupid, stupid mistake." "It was," Eliza nodded. "Your mistake was thinking I was an accessory. I was never the accessory, Dominic. I was the architect." She walked past him. You can't just leave me with nothing," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "After 10 years, I loved you. I worked for you." Eliza stopped, her back to him. She turned her head slightly. "No, Dominic, you didn't work for me. You worked for my company, and your performance has been deemed deficient. Security." The Ether guards, who had been patiently waiting, stepped forward. One took each of Dominic's arms. "This is assault!" he yelled, as they began to physically drag him toward the revolving doors. "I am Dominic Stone. You can't do this to me. I'll tell the press. Eliza, please." Eliza watched as the man who had been the King of Charleston was unceremoniously dumped onto the sidewalk outside the building that used to bear his name. The stone capital sign overhead was already being prepared for removal. She turned to Arthur Graham. "Mr. Graham, have the sign removed before noon, and we will rebrand. I like my father's original name." "Sterling Innovations," Arthur said with a hint of a smile. "It has integrity." "Yes," Eliza said, walking toward the elevator. "It does. I will be in my office." The elevator doors chimed, and Eliza Sterling, ascended to her throne. The legacy. The day after the lobby confrontation was not just news. It was a seismic event. The city, which had feasted on the story of the scandalous kiss, was now served a far richer, more complex, and infinitely more satisfying meal. The Wall Street Journal, having hurriedly retracted their "The Siren" story, now screamed a headline that would become iconic. "The King is dead. Long live the Queen. How Silent Wife, Eliza Sterling, built and destroyed an empire." The story was everywhere. It wasn't just yellow journalism. It was a financial earthquake. The Financial Times ran a sober, astonished analysis titled, "The Ghost of Ether: How Stone Capital Was a $10 billion Decoy for 12 Years." Forbes, which had put Dominic's face on its cover just a month prior, launched a digital edition. Invisible Billionaire, Eliza Sterling, just gave a masterclass in corporate governance. The narrative, once a simple tale of a foolish wife and a cheating husband, was instantly rewritten. Eliza was not the scorned woman. She was the architect, the ghost, the ice queen. Feminist bloggers and financial gurus lauded her equally. Vogue ran an op-ed titled "The Power of the Pantsuit," analyzing her lobby entrance as a declaration of war and a new uniform for the woman who has had enough. In an instant, she was not only powerful, but a global symbol of quiet, terrifying competence. But while the world read about the new queen, the old court was in ruins. Dominic Stone hadn't slept. He wasn't in the penthouse. His key fob hadn't even worked in the elevator. He wasn't in a five-star hotel. His Amex Centurion, his black card, his very identity, had been rejected with a discreet digital beep of finality. He was in a sterile, two-bed night Holiday Inn room downtown, a room he paid for with the last cash in his wallet. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, the cheap comforter scratching his skin, watching his own execution on CNN. He saw Eliza in that black pantsuit, walking into his lobby. He saw himself, a madman, being dragged away, his face a crimson mask, screaming his own name like a curse. "It's a lie," he muttered, the remote control in his hand. He clicked to Fox Business. A panel was dissecting the Event Horizon clause. "It's a brilliant, brutal piece of legal work," one analyst said. "He violated the morality clause in front of the whole world. She didn't just divorce him, she fired him." "It's theft!" Dominic roared at the screen. "It's my company. I built it." He grabbed his phone, his contacts. They were all there. The most powerful men and women in New York and Atlanta. He would fight this. He would build an army. He called David Minguez, his personal lawyer, the shark who had drafted the prenup. "Dominic," David's voice was clipped, nervous. I can't talk." "What do you mean you can't talk?" Dominic shrieked. "She's stealing it. We sue her. We sue Ether. We tear her apart. You said the prenup was unbreakable." "It is, Dominic," Minguez said, his voice dropping. "It protects the verified original ownership. And Dominic, I've seen the incorporation documents. They were just sent over by Ether's counsel. You don't have any original ownership. You were a CEO, an employee on payroll. You founded Stone Capital as a 100% subsidiary of Ether Holdings. Dominic, she funded your startup. It was always hers." The phone felt slick in Dominic's hand. No, that's not..." "And Dominic," Minguez said, the final nail, "I can no longer represent you. Your retainer agreement was with Stone Capital. Since you are no longer an agent of that company, and frankly, given Ether's counsel has sent a cease and desist to my entire firm, we are dropping you. Conflict of interest. Goodbye, Dominic. The line went dead. He tried others. His club friends, his rivals on the board. No one answered. Voice messages. User not found. He was a non-person. He was radioactive. A primal scream of rage and terror welled up in his chest. He threw the phone. It smashed against the wall in front of a generic framed print of a rowboat. He had one last card, one last desperate move. He used the hotel phone to call the one person who still profited from his misery, the columnist from the Wall Street Journal who had been at the Gala. 2 hours later, they were in the hotel's dark, empty bar. The columnist, a man named Marcus, sipped a club soda, a small recorder on the table. "She's a monster," Dominic spat, his hands shaking. He hadn't shaved. "She's a black widow. She planned this for 12 years. She's inhuman. She let me build it just to take it away. She's the one who had the affair, you know, with Graham. I'm certain of it." Marcus just nodded, his eyes gleaming. "This is good, Dominic. This is gold. The betrayal of the Ice Queen. Keep talking." "I am talking," Dominic said, leaning in. "About my story, my book, my movie. I'll tell everyone the truth." "I'm afraid you won't, Mr. Stone." A new, quiet, cold voice interrupted the bar. Dominic and Marcus spun around. A young man in a perfectly tailored, unwrinkled suit was standing there. He looked about 25, but his eyes were ancient. He worked for Arthur Graham. "Who the hell are you?" Dominic snapped. The young man did not answer. He simply placed a single folded document on the table in front of Dominic and tapped it. "What is this?" Dominic unfolded it. "That," the young counsel said, "is Appendix F, Section 3 of your CEO employment contract, the non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. It is comprehensive. It states, in short, that you cannot discuss Ether Holdings, Sterling Innovations, or any member of its board, which includes Eliza Sterling, in any public or private forum in perpetuity." "Or what?" Dominic scoffed, though his heart hammered. "Or," the counsel said, "you will be liable for liquidated damages in the sum of," and I quote, $1.5 billion. "My firm has been instructed to monitor all media. If a single word of Mr. Stone's story appears in print, we will file suit, and we will win. We always do." The counsel looked at Marcus. "And you, sir, are now part of a potential tortious interference. I would advise you to delete that recording." Marcus, who had faced angry celebrities and mob lawyers, fumbled with his recorder and hit delete. He was terrified. "Good day, gentlemen." The young counsel turned and walked away. Dominic stared at this paper. It was a prison. He wasn't just ruined. He was silenced. He had no money, no company, no friends, and not even a story to sell. He was a ghost. He had been completely, utterly erased. The fall of the siren. Sierra Vance, on the other hand, was not the type to be erased. She was a fighter. She was a siren. And she was, in her own mind, the true victim. She spent 48 hours exhausting her remaining credit lines, assembling a dream team of lawyers. She was suing for wrongful termination, sexual harassment. Eliza created a hostile environment and emotional distress. She was going to own Eliza Sterling. Her day in court, or rather, a sterile deposition room, came 3 weeks later. She walked in a dark, modest suit, her fiery hair pulled back. She was playing the role of the serious, aggrieved professional. Eliza was not there, of course. Only Arthur Graham, flanked by his sharp, young associate. "Ms. Vance," Arthur began, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Let's not waste time. You allege wrongful termination." "I was the highest performing executive at Stone Capital," Sierra said, her voice clear and rehearsed. I was fired out of personal spite by a jealous, unbalanced woman. An unbalanced woman who, as sole shareholder, had every right to dissolve the board and clean house, Arthur countered. But let's discuss your performance. Were you, or were you not, engaged in a sexual relationship with your direct superior, CEO Dominic Stone? My personal life is irrelevant. It is, Arthur said, sliding a file across the table. When you use that personal life to defraud the company. This is a copy of the SEC complaint we filed yesterday. Let's go to Exhibit A1. He produced a printout. This is your corporate Amex statement. On it, you purchased a custom red Carolina Herrera gown for $14,000. The description you filed with accounting was client entertainment and networking. Ms. Vance, whom were you entertaining? Sierra's face paled. Dominic approved all my expenses. Which brings us to Exhibit B, Arthur continued relentlessly. A bank wire authorized by you for $2,000 from the Legacy Project marketing budget. This money was wired to Siren PR, a shell company incorporated in Delaware and owned by your sister. That was for a media blitz. A media blitz? Arthur said, sliding a copy of the Wall Street Journal with the kiss on it. Which appears to have been heavily focused on your personal brand, not the company's. This, Ms. Vance, is either fraud. It is conspiracy. This is not a wrongful termination suit. This is a pre-trial hearing for a criminal case. Your criminal case. Sierra stared. The fight was gone. She was trapped. Now, Arthur said, leaning back. My client, Ms. Sterling, is generous. She finds this whole thing very distasteful. She is willing to drop the criminal charges and not sue you for the full amount of the assets you stole. I didn't steal. On the condition, Arthur continued, as if she hadn't spoken, that you drop this frivolous lawsuit, sign a full binding confession, and agree to the same non-disclosure agreement as Mr. Stone. Sierra's face crumpled. So I get nothing. Oh, quite the opposite, Arthur said. You get to stay out of a federal prison. Sierra Vance's ignominious end didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened a month later in a Starbucks in Charleston. Her lawsuits were gone. Her reputation shredded. The asset misappropriation lawsuit had bankrupted her. She was trying to buy a $6 latte. Declined, the barista said without looking up. What? No, try it again, Sierra snapped. It's a new card. The barista sighed, swiped it again. Declined. Again? Do you have cash? Do you know who I am? Sierra shrieked, the pressure of the last month exploding. I ran a billion-dollar company. This is ridiculous. Mom, I just need $650, she said in her native tongue. I am Sierra Vance. I will cost you your job. The video, titled Billionaire's Mistress Has Starbucks Meltdown, hit 10 million views before midnight. She wasn't just ruined. She was a meme. She was a joke. The coronation, while the old guard self-destructed, the new queen was building. Eliza Sterling's first act as chairwoman of the rebranded Sterling Innovations was not to celebrate, but to demolish. She stood in the huge, opulent boardroom, Dominic's throne room, with the architects of the Legacy Project. Madam Chairwoman, Ms. Sterling, the lead architect, a nervous man named Peter, began. Here are the revised blueprints for the spire. As Mr. Stone requested, it will be the tallest residential structure in the Western Hemisphere. A 20,000 square foot penthouse. Private. Stop, Eliza said. Her voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. Thank you, Mr. Peter, but you can throw this away. The architects looked at each other in horror. But Madam Chairwoman, this is 4 years of work. It was 4 years of work on the wrong project, Eliza said, walking to the giant model of the glittering phallic tower. This is a monument to one man's ego. I have no interest in ego. I am interested in a legacy. She turned to the stunned team. We are redesigning from the ground up. The spire is gone. We are not building a private club for billionaires. We are building a community." She pointed to the base of the model. "This half. It becomes 1,000 units of state-of-the-art dignified housing for low to middle-income families. This private park," she moved a small gold-plated model tree, "is now a public park. And this space, it becomes a new, fully funded STEM school for the district." "But Ms. Sterling," Peter stammered, The profit, the margins on this design are razor thin. Mr. Stone's design was..." "It was obscene," Eliza offered. "Do not worry about the margins, Mr. Peter. Worry about the skyline. My father believed the health of a company was tied to the health of the city it lived in. We are not just building apartments. We are investing in the city. Now, can your team handle that? Or should I find one that can?" Peter, seeing the steel in her eyes, suddenly felt a rush of inspiration he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," he said, standing straighter. "Yes, Ms. Sterling, we can." "Good," Eliza said. "I want new blueprints on my desk in 1 week." When the story of the new legacy project broke, the city, already on her side, fell in love. She wasn't just a cold-blooded corporate raider. She was a visionary. She was, as one columnist put it, the billionaire we didn't know we needed. 3 months later, autumn in Charleston, the gigantic, flashy letters of Stone Capital had been scraped from the building. In their place, in elegant, brushed steel, were the words "Sterling Innovations." Eliza stood in her office, the office that had, in fact, always been hers. The heavy dark mahogany and leather were gone, replaced by light woods, glass, and a breathtaking collection of modern art. The room was no longer a tomb of ego. It was a hub of light and air. Arthur Graham walked in, not bothering to knock. That was his custom. "Madam Chairwoman," he said. He still called her that, but there was a warmth to it now. "Arthur," she replied, turning from the window. "First quarter projections are in." He handed her a tablet. "It seems the market has a taste for integrity. We are up 30% over Stone Capital's best quarter. The new legacy project has secured 3 massive institutional partners. The city is ecstatic." "Good," Eliza said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "And one final administrative news item," Arthur said, a rare, sly look in his eyes. "You'll recall we are taking bids for catering services for the first annual Sterling Foundation Gala. We have received several offers, and a call came in this morning. A very persistent sales representative from a new supplier, Monarch Catering Supplies based out of Savannah." Eliza's smile did not waver, but her eyes were momentarily ice. "Go on." "The representative," Arthur continued, "was a Mr. Dominic Stone. He was very insistent about speaking directly to you to make the sale personally. He said he had a long-standing relationship with the principal." Eliza was silent for a moment, looking out at the city she now so visibly helped to lead. She thought of the man screaming in her dressing room. She thought of the man who had kissed his mistress for the world to see. And now she thought of the man on the phone, in a cheap suit, trying to sell her cocktail napkins. "And what did you tell him, Arthur?" she asked, her voice soft. "I informed Mr. Stone that all vendor communication must go through the acquisitions department," Arthur said, his voice flat. "I also cautioned him that, given his familiarity with the company principal, any further direct contact might be viewed as a conflict of interest, or perhaps harassment." "And the bid?" Eliza asked. "Competitive per unit," Arthur said, with the slightest shrug. "But I'm informed the quality of his napkins is, to put it mildly, deficient. We will, of course, be declining." Eliza finally laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was real and warm and filled the entire office. "Thank you, Arthur. That will be all." "Madam Chairwoman." He left her alone. Eliza Sterling turned back to the window. The weight of the diamonds was gone. The weight of the dresses was gone. The weight of the name Stone was a bitter, distant memory. All that remained was the crown. It was heavy. It was hers. And she, for the first time in her life, realized she was born to wear it. The meaningful ending. And so, the empire built on arrogance was toppled by the woman who laid the first stone. Eliza Stone, now Eliza Sterling, didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She reminded the world that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Dominic and Sierra thought they were taking over the company, but they were only employees, and they had just been given the ultimate pink slip. Tell me in the comments, what did you think of Eliza's final power move? Do you think Dominic's downfall was satisfying, or did he deserve even more? If you loved this story of drama, karma, and sweet, sweet revenge, make sure to hit that like button on this video. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Share this video with a friend who needs to see that the best revenge is owning everything.